Hello, everybody. Hello. Lots of familiar faces. Hello, Randall. Hi, lovely to see you. And Blake's here. Everybody know Randall is the D of Polyvagal Institute. Blake is the Director of Education. And people know Rashawn by now, my assistant. And Susie's here. Yay. Beautiful. Susie is the COO of PVI, our new person. And Janina Fisher is here beside me. Here we all are. Wonderful, wonderful. Just give it a few more minutes for people to come. People are still coming in. If you cross your screens, can you see people you know? We love it when you turn your cameras on so we can see our faces. So important, right? If you can, to just give a smile so people can connect. There's two people sitting together. Heidi, hello, Heidi. Heidi and I know each other from the Focusing Institute. Wonderful. Okay, so as people are still coming in, let's start by just saying a friendly hello to our bodies. This is why we're here, embodied dialogues, right? We're connecting and chatting away with wonderful people like Janina Fisher, who's coming to join us. And we want to do that in a way that we really welcome all of who we are to be here. So our body is a really focal place in embodied dialogues. We want to speak from what's happening down inside. So just taking a moment, because to really hear our bodies, we have to slow things down and pause. And then just gently, if it feels comfortable, to soften your gaze. But you don't have to. Just let your body decide. And then slowly bringing your attention somewhere down into a place that calls to you inside. And then just notice where you land in your body. Where is this place? And what does it have to tell you? And then just being really gentle with whatever comes there. Maybe there's something that will want your attention that you can go back to later on. Or maybe there's a word or an image or a movement in your body that comes from this place. We call that the handle in focusing. And you might notice also where your body is right now in your nervous system. And just say hello to whatever that place is. And then slowly and gently coming back to notice the space around you. You might want to just wiggle around a little bit in your chair. Yeah, seeing that wiggling around there a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. It's amazing how much we can still stay connected with each other, even though we're all in these separate spaces. We have this amazing community that we've created here through the Polyvagal Institute. So I'm really excited. I'm fired up. My attention went to my heart, and it's like beating a little bit more quickly, and this sense of having you, Janina, with us. Janina is, as I like to call you, a legend in the field of trauma and addiction. I remember when I introduced you when you spoke at the Polyvagal conference, and that's when we met in Florida. And I was nervous, and you reached over and you said to me, "I like your scarf." And that made all the difference. I was like, girl talk. It was like, oh, she's just a person, right? And it was a real cue of safety. You know, it helped me to just settle down inside and really be able to introduce you in a way that felt very genuine for me. Not to put people on pedestals, but to really admire and respect people that have really shaped the field of trauma. And Janina, you are absolutely one of those people. So I think you started way back in the was it the 80s?
The early 90s.
Early 90s. And I think you told me that you were Judith Herman's first student.
No, I wasn't her first student. I was a postdoc fellow in her clinic for years.
Yeah.
Where all of this was very new, where we
very, very new. Yeah, I remember when Judith Herman's book came out, Trauma and Recovery, and we all ran to buy it and read it and gobble it up, right? Because it still is amazing work. Yeah. And then you published a book, I guess it was in 2017 with Routledge, right? Your sort of formative book, Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors, and created a model for working with trauma survivors called trauma-informed stabilization treatment. And you're very busy still all over the world teaching this model.
Right, which is very exciting. It's a trauma-informed parts model. It just has such beautiful things happen when we use it. It's just a joy to teach it.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so Rashawn, can you spotlight Janina and we're going to have a little dialogue together, and then we'll come back to the group and have lots of time for Q&A and just discussion about whatever comes up that gets sparked inside. So, I'm really curious as to, you've been doing this for so long, and yet it's still so fresh for you, right?
Right. Does it ever get old?
Yeah, no, I agree.
We get old, but
it
doesn't get old.
But what is so great, I think, is how we can keep the work so fresh and alive and exciting, even though, we can find ourselves explaining things many times in many different ways. So what is it right now that's really kind of juicy or exciting, or you're wanting to delve into more, or you're really passionate about something that's kind of there for you right now?
In the addiction space?
Sure. Yeah. Whatever, trauma, addiction. Yeah.
I mean, for me, TIS, trauma-informed stabilization treatment, is what I'm most passionate about. And this year, we're going to be doing trainings for French therapists, German therapists, and South American therapists.
Beautiful.
We did a whole series the last 2 years for Italian therapists. So it's very exciting to see it being translated and to have therapists feel rejuvenated, talk about the work being new.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think if I think about it from a polyvagal informed perspective,
Yeah.
I think part of why it works and part of why therapists love it as well as clients is that there's a big social engagement piece of it.
Hmm.
And in a way of focusing. It's a
Mhm.
way of focusing
Yeah, yeah.
that is less threatening
Mhm.
for most trauma survivors. Like the practice we did would be a
Mhm.
nightmare for many trauma survivors,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Look inside, body, how could you ask me to do that?
Yeah, yeah. So we start really gently and always by saying if it's okay, if it feels okay to do that, but it may not feel okay. And that's completely normal when it's scary to go inside and you've been so wounded, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then, of course, you have the clients who say, I wasn't wounded. I don't know what you're talking about.
But something brought them to you.
Yes, right, exactly.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more for people that don't know about the model too much? Um, Tell us a bit more about what it is. What is it, and how do you work with people in this kind of way?
So it's, as I said, a trauma-informed parts model,
Yeah.
and it was really an integration of techniques from many other models, but particularly ideas and techniques from IFS
Yeah.
and from sensory motor psychotherapy. So there's a somatic component,
Yeah.
and then a lot of uh, the parts work is inspired by IFS, but it's trauma informed. So there's a way that we focus that addresses the major challenges involved with trauma, which I'm sure you and everyone who's listening is very familiar with those challenges.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you work with meet Dick Schwartz early on as well?
I read his book, The Mosaic Mind, in 1996.
Yeah.
I taught myself IFS from that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I met him years later, I already knew his work,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was thrilled to see it getting more and more and more acceptance. And now,
Yeah.
um,
So mainstream now, so popular. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it makes sense, right?
yeah,
It makes sense that we all have parts of ourselves. I think the other thing that the way in which we really connect with each other, as we've had discussions before, that's related to the polyvagal lens as well, is really understanding how so many of these trauma responses are adaptive,
mhm,
right? They're adaptive ways that the body has of surviving when there isn't enough safety.
right, right,
Yeah. And
right,
so, really being able to give that to clients. I remember we talked about that, how special that is when you can really help people to understand it's just what bodies do.
mm,
Bodies dissociate to protect you. What would happen if we didn't have that? We
right.
wouldn't.
So in TIST, we say, right, that that alcoholic part, that addict part, has been trying to save you from yourself or save you from your own nervous system,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it doesn't trust that you actually can tolerate these feelings and sensations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And don't you find that this is so liberating for people when they understand that these ways that become really problematic are natural responses to helping us to cope with life?
Right. And I think when the addict part or the alcoholic part is named as a part,
Yeah.
and enables the client to have a relationship to it, which is different than when it's all kind of a emotional and cognitive mishmash in the client's already overwhelmed mind.
Yeah, absolutely, because then we realize that this behavior doesn't define the whole person.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is really different than a lot of the 12-step idea that, I am this is who I am. And we're saying, well, yeah, it's a part of you. It's a way of coping. It's what Steve would say, Porge, is a state regulation strategy, right? It shifts you from
That's
sympathetic
exactly how I define it.
down. Yeah, me too. I call them propellers because they shift you back and forth from that flight fight state into then numbing and shutting down and back the other way, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm a big proponent of 12-step programs because part of what 12-step programs do is to teach people to shift states in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there are so many things about 12-step that have been really helpful in terms of, for example, the group work, right, is invaluable. But yeah, I think it's one of those areas where we need to take a look at, what's going on there, what's helpful and what's maybe not so helpful. Some people that come to us, they don't like that feeling of being identified totally in that way. And they want some space around that. But there's certainly features of the program that have been incredibly helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always think, that part that says, I'm not like these other people. I don't, that's actually the addict part. Trying desperately to keep its strategy intact.
Maybe sometimes, yeah. And maybe sometimes it's also just, I think it's important to offer different ways of being able to heal, and that for some people it just does feel too defining and they can't separate out from that. So
You ready?
Is
what?
Oh,
Yes, it didn't get run last night.
Somebody's talking.
Yeah, somebody's microphone is off.
We need to mute. Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, tell me then, are you writing these days or are you mostly teaching? What are you spending your time with?
I'm 90% of what I do is teaching.
Yeah.
Yes. And I have a few clients that I still see, just a few.
Yeah.
As I try to slowly move toward retirement from practice.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine retiring from what we do.
I know. I was going to ask you about that too. So I do too. There's some people you just can't really kind of let go and say goodbye. And there's a long history that we can build with our clients, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you see yourself moving towards retirement, or does it feel like something other people do?
No, it's retiring from practice.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Just from the responsibility
Yeah.
of having clients. And it's not retiring.
Yeah, not retiring. The teaching part is so much fun.
Yeah.
But you must get tired. I mean, you're really like going full force. How do you rejuvenate?
I I make PowerPoint slides. I watch the Olympics. I hang out with my children and grandchildren. But I find this work is exciting.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
I remember hearing, sorry?
I find it exciting to work with addicted clients because they're challenging, and and one of the things that it's really interesting, I wanted to ask you, if
Yeah.
polyvagal addresses this issue, they come to us with a prefrontal cortex that is shut down
Mhm.
by their dysregulated responses.
Yeah.
So their ability to, I mean, that's why we have to repeat ourselves a million times a day,
Mhm.
because they can't take in new information
Yeah. Yeah.
and they can't remember it and they can't retrieve it.
Mhm.
So that repetition becomes very, very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a polyvagal lens, we would also share with clients and teach them, I'm sure you do this too, that, there's reasons why that prefrontal cortex closes down when that trauma feedback loop is so entrenched in the brain, and how we can, through really engaging ventral vagal practices, that prefrontal cortex begins to come online again. And you can see it in people, can't you? That they just start to, awaken and feel sharper the more they ground in the body. Yeah.
I mean, to get the prefrontal cortex going, I find that going into the body doesn't usually help. It's
Again, yeah,
it's
sorry.
it's the focusing, it's the mindfulness part. So
Uh,
first, I have to teach people to notice, because that is the easiest way to get the prefrontal cortex activated.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a timing thing, isn't it? It's like, at what point do you begin to introduce that as part of the process of healing?
Well,
The very
I would say in
beginning.
the first session.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of people noticing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Noticing the easy stuff, not the hard stuff.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And are you getting them to notice patterns?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that's so difficult with addiction, is when your life just becomes more and more and more constricted, and you can't think as clearly, and things just get smaller and more limited, and having these ways of being able to open that up over time is so liberating for people.
Well, and I think of it, I think you must have um, clients with less life-threatening addictions.
Mhm.
I'm working with people who could kill somebody else or inadvertently kill themselves. So we don't have time to to kind of take it slowly. I have to start helping them to notice and be interested. And actually, what I get them to be interested in is very polyvagal. I mean, it comes from sensory motor psychotherapy, but it's very polyvagal in form. I get them to be interested in their nervous systems
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and in the question, how does it help? Like, what's your state before you drink or before you pick up a drug? And then what's your state when you're under the influence?
Mhm.
And what's your state as the drug begins to wear off?
Absolutely, because it's that way of being able to connect that then helps people to begin to engage and think about what they're doing, right?
Right. And actually, at first, I don't care if they think about it. I just want them to notice.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Because by the time people get to the very advanced stages of addiction, it's actually helping less and less.
The addictive behavior. Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Right? Because the client has reached tolerance.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very tough place to be.
Mhm.
Addiction is such a tough place to be. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but being able to really help people to shift out of that and recognize that shift as well in the body, it's amazing work. I mean, it really, I think a lot of trauma therapists, and we've talked about this, that there's been this real split between working with trauma and working with addiction. And bringing those fields together and recognizing that if you're struggling with deep trauma stuff, you're struggling with often some kind of addictive behavior that's helping you to cope, right? To shift from that sympathetic state down into dorsal or back again. So,
Or
yeah.
shift both.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really important message that, I'm really trying to share that a lot, that if we're working with trauma, we really need to be open to looking at what addictive behaviors are going on there. Yeah.
And the other interesting thing that I think polyvagal informed treatment and TIST have in common is we're not event focused.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
most of the trauma treatment models, EMDR, IFS,
Yeah.
prolonged exposure, are all event focused as opposed to nervous system focused.
Yes, I think that's really true. Yeah. Yeah, because events can happen and people respond to them differently, right?
Right. And events are not what you're left with after the event is over.
Yeah.
You're left with its effects
Yeah.
on your nervous system.
Yeah, yeah. This is 𝗘𝗵𝗹𝗂𝗋𝗃's message too, right? It's not what happened to you, but how you're carrying that in your body.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And your mind and your emotions and your parts.
yeah, in your parts for sure. Yeah.
Mm.
So shall we open it up? Because I think there's a lot of people here. We've got 115 people with us. And let's go and see what their questions and comments are. You good with that?
That's great.
Great. Okay. So we'll stop spotlighting Rashawn and come back to the group. There we are. Great. Okay. So let's have a look in the chat and see what's here. Anybody want to ask a question live? Just put up your hand. Come talk to us. Annette?
Hi, thanks, Jen. Hi, Janina.
Hi.
Would you talk a little bit about the importance of shame in dealing with trauma? That's such an underlying feeling with so many of us, and it's not even emotion that's even talked about, even in things like the new Disney movie about emotions.
Oh my goodness. Inside Out 2 left out the shame part? That's shocking.
Crazy.
Yeah. Well, I have a very particular perspective on shame because I see shame as a survival response. It's part of the dorsal vagal or total submission response, right? Because what does shame do, right? Besides, we get the flushing, which is sympathetic, and then we go into collapse. We want to hide. We get numb. We can't speak. So I think of it as both evoked by abuse and humiliation, but also as a survival response, because it prevents the child from talking back, getting angry, crying, right? It basically puts a wet blanket on every other emotion.
Yeah, this is so polyvagal, what you're saying, Janina, because it's adaptive, right? It helps us to stay safer in the body.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I'm speaking from a sensory motor psychotherapy point of view, but it's the same nervous system.
Yes.
And the same body, whatever our particular languaging is.
Yeah, exactly.
So I try to help people relate to the shame as a feeling memory, right? So people, any one of us could get triggered, and the shame comes up as a feeling memory. And so that it persists decades after it was useful and adaptive.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the worst part about shame is because it's so physical, it's easier to believe that it's true. That's actually saying something about you. And so I try to help people notice shame as a part that was trying to keep them safer, not safe, but safer, by shutting down, by being silent, by literally keeping the head down.
And that's the dorsal, that folding in and collapsing, that shape of the body that we see, that we
Right.
talk about in the polyvagal language. Yeah.
Right, that's the parasympathetic response.
Yeah.
And so I try to help people to, in a way, celebrate that shame part as a hero in their life story.
Absolutely. Again, the similar theme you can hear, right, in what we're saying of these adaptive features around addictions and dissociation and shame that helped us in this way to survive when you understand the context, right? The context tells the story. Yeah, beautiful. Other people? Somebody else had their hand up, I thought. Something in the chat.
If I may ask a question.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
Mondi, my goodness, Mondi. Hello,
It's
I
been
haven't
years.
seen you in years.
Yes.
Oh,
How are
lovely
you?
to see you. I'm good.
Thanks. Thanks. I have a question. Not that I'm perfect, but what if you live with someone who has had trauma and you're not a therapist? So, any tips?
Right. What if you're a therapist and you live with anybody? Well, I think I would use, I would use my understanding of trauma, and I have, within my own family, including my kids. I understand when I'm not triggered by their reactions. Right? I understand that their reactions are triggered.
Yeah.
And then the question is, can we actually talk about that? Or are they convinced that how they feel is my fault? Right? It's much easier to be helpful if your spouse or partner knows they're triggered and knows that triggering is no fault, right? That there's nothing we can do about triggering each other. And the closer we are, the more likely we are to trigger each other.
Yeah.
I've just found that at least my family members and spouse have been singularly uninterested in my being a therapist in the house. Right? And I actually think the more I try not to be a therapist, the more influence I have.
Interesting topic, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. How we take all of what we know and how do we live with that in our communities and our families.
Right, and how do we live with it when we know more than our loved one about what's going on with them in that moment?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Or when we know that there's help for them that they're not seeking.
Mhm. The more grounded we can stay, I find the more ventral I can stay or remind myself to come back to that when I'm triggered with a family member, the more gracious I can be. But I can't always be gracious. It's the nature of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got a question over here. Is it, how do you say your name? Decum?
It's Declan Murphy from
Oh,
Ireland.
Declan.
Yeah,
D-E-C-O-M is what I say. Declan, hello.
Declan Murphy. Yeah. No, I guess I just wanted to bring maybe attention to like a very helpful group. In the traditions of 12-step recovery, there's adult children of alcoholics and dysfunction. It's called ACOA. So that's a group, for people who were children of alcoholics and who live with that trauma as being little children in those, I suppose, frozen states
Yeah.
or flight states that they carry. And in adulthood, obviously, it impedes them in many ways, but it's a very powerful group. So it's long been established, but it's less spoken or known about. But there are some people I've seen in the chat as well who mentioned it. Very helpful for people to speak the trauma out of their bodies in that safe group.
Yeah.
And also it's for people whose parents were not just alcoholics, but dysfunction as well. For example, my own mom had bipolar, and that's where my trauma was. So just thought I'd mention it. ACOA. And they're very accessible and
All over the
yeah,
world, I think, Declan.
all over the world, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. That is one of the great things, that accessibility is so important. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, Judith Herman used to say that she wished all trauma survivors could be participants in 12-step groups, because just the 12 steps as a practice are so helpful for trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Declan. Yeah.
Thanks.
And
Maybe just yeah.
sure, go ahead.
Well, just one other thing. There has also been studies done recently that spoke about the impact of 12-step recovery as a kind of replacement safe attachment. So the participants in Overeaters Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, they spoke about the sense of safety they felt in that group, and also the therapeutic alliance was masked with sponsor and sponsee relationships. So these are studies that have just come out, very interesting and evidence for these benefits.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Social
Thanks, guys.
engagement. Yeah. Thanks, Declan. Shuba? Did I say your name properly? Yes? Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, where are you?
So I'm connecting from India.
Oh,
My full name is Hi everyone. Absolute privilege to be in this room right now. So I'll be real quick. Sorry. My full name is 𝗘𝗺𝗯𝟐, and you can call me Shiva. That's okay. And this question is actually for Janina ma'am. Ma'am, I'm sorry. Yes, sorry. So the question is actually
Take your
about
time.
take your time.
Okay, there's
Have
no
a breath.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take
I
a
mean, I have always seen you like in a video, and right now you're live, so it's like
breath.
so yeah. Sorry. So my question is actually, so I've been like working on my own sort of like healing journey and helping others as well, and especially from the trauma context of everything that you just spoke of, everything made sense. But I would like to know your thoughts about sort of like folks who are working on the addiction aspect of trauma and healing that addiction aspect, but not a physical addiction, right? So, sort of, if it makes sense, then not all addictions are just physical addictions, right? It's not always about alcohol or some sort of like sensual addiction. Um, in my opinion or in my observation, from what I've learned, the biggest form of or the hardest form of addictions are thought-based addictions. When you go back, retreat back into some sort of like thought, or essentially, I'm going back to the concept of like self-image. And when so my focus area is around CPTSD and folks, who are dealing with like ACE related trauma or neglect related trauma, childhood neglect related trauma, those sort of things. And everything that you said earlier made sense, because essentially it is about integrating all those parts. It is about coming from a place of compassion towards ourselves first and our, well, broken parts, or the parts of within ourselves who didn't receive the love and everything that they should have received at the right time. But I don't find a lot of work, ma'am, or a lot of sort of resources that can help with the thought-based addiction. There's a lot that's available on. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So give an example of a thought-based addiction.
Cool. Right. So, thought-based addiction could look like, I mean, I believe I can be vulnerable right now, and it's okay for me to be vulnerable with you. So it could be something like, let's say I have a self-image that's based out of certain things that I heard about myself from my own childhood, right? Let's say things that help shape my self-image of myself. The most common one being I'm not good enough. That's the most common self-depreciating thought, right? Most people deal with. And that could manifest out. So how I see it is that alcoholism, abuse, or any form of like external manifestation, these are just the manifestation of that internal state of being, right? Last Saturday, I was discussing the same thing with Dan Siegel sir, and he and we were on the same idea. We were coming to the same point that we have to come to a place of integrating that broken parts inside of us. But how do we integrate it when it's frozen back in time? You know what I mean? Uh, that I mean, it's nice to tell ourselves that, oh, I am good enough. I can do it. See, I have a proof. I did it. I proved it to myself.
But the part that believes that she's not good enough won't believe it. So, right? So I don't think of that as an addiction. I think of that as rumination, right? Right? Because it does change your state, but it changes your state in a negative way. Right? I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Here are 10 reasons why I'm not good enough. Right? Nobody will love me because I'm not good enough. Right? The ruminations go on and on and on and on. So,
And it's like we just go on. Sorry.
so I treat that as a part, as a protector part that's trying to keep you from being visible, from having confidence, having courage, because presumably it wasn't safe to be visible and vocal. So when that part gets going on, you aren't good enough, you aren't good enough, you aren't good enough. Take a moment, notice that as a part, and thank the part for trying to help you.
Yeah,
So
that
there's
brings up a lot of
that adaptive feature again, Janina.
Yeah.
To really appreciate the adaptive way that helped you to survive. We're going to move on, 𝗘𝗵, because we've got 4 other people, but thank you so much for sharing. Lena, hello, Lena, from Sweden.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good.
So I'm curious, Janina, reading and learning from you and the procedural memory, it's so important not to kind of induce and repeat shame in treating. I work as a psychotherapist. And then a lot of people follow like the Brené Brown thing of you need to tell your story, you need to talk about your shame, you need to tell what happened to you. And there's kind of a contradiction there that I'm curious about how you reason around that.
Well, most of my reasoning comes from clinical practice. So I've seen hundreds and hundreds of clients who have done it the Brené Brown way, told their stories, felt the shame, talked about the shame, told their stories again, felt more shame. And it didn't budge the shame.
No.
It didn't move it.
Right.
And so my approach to shame, which is to think, okay, how is shame adaptive? How did it help you survive? Is a very, very different perspective.
Yeah.
And you can also, you can also treat shame as a dorsal vagal response.
Yeah.
As opposed to a part having a dorsal vagal response.
Yeah.
I just find it easier it's easier to evoke some compassion or empathy for the shame if it's defined as a part.
Yeah. I love your hot potato technique because I think it puts movement, so it changes from dorsal to a sympathetic state because there is a little bit of action, a little bit of movement, and a laugh, so it becomes also ventral.
Right.
So
right.
I prefer working that way. I just needed to hear your arguments because I need to borrow them. I haven't had hundreds and hundreds of clients the Brené Brown way.
Right.
I prefer
Right.
to work your way. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I think too, Janina, when we combine these ways of understanding, and different clients will resonate with different ones. So we try parts, we try, nervous system, we can bring them together. And some people will, you just see how some people will really resonate with one way of understanding something in the body as opposed to another, but it's great to have these different ways, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And they go together. Parts and polyvagal theory go together so nicely. They really do. Yeah. I had 𝗔𝗯cie𝘂𝗁𝘁 on a couple of months ago, and we had a great conversation about how these models go together so nicely too. Okay, Kathleen. Hello, Kathleen.
Hi. Hi.
Where are you?
I am in Massachusetts,
Hello.
in the States. Hi.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. I really enjoyed what you said about having the client be, if there's like an addictive behavior, to be present where they are in their nervous system before and during and after. And it brought up kind of like a 2-part question of how to help them stay present if the charge is very activating without going into shutdown. And then my second question in conjunction to that is, if they can develop that awareness, what do they do with that awareness after to make a choice that could be different if the behavior is serving them in some way. I don't know if
Right.
that's clear.
No, I mean, it's clear to me.
Okay.
So for the therapist, it takes a lot of patience to lead someone to the moment of realizing I am about to hit my bottom. I am about to crash and burn, and I have to do something. Because otherwise, the addictive behavior or substances do what I call erasing the blackboard. So, so the individual thinks, oh, this is terrible. What have I done? I can't believe I lied to my wife and kids again. I drove home drunk. And in that moment says, I can't keep doing this. Then goes to sleep, blacks out, wakes up the next morning, and the blackboard is erased. There's no memory of having gotten to that point of saying, I can't do it anymore. And so my job is to keep all this information on the blackboard and help them to notice it. Because information when your prefrontal cortex is not working isn't as useful as when it is working. So I just, Richard Clough says, I bore my patients into health. I think that's what I do. So I just keep asking them over and over, okay, what was happening in your nervous system? What triggered you? Let's just notice the pattern. And then where were you afterward? Did you feel better or did you feel worse? Until they begin to be as horrified by the pattern as we are. But it takes time and patience, and it takes a confidence that human beings are designed to survive, and that we can't make them stop using. We have to ally with them in a way that they can allow us to help them when they're ready. So that's good news and bad news.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure does take patience.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Martha.
First and all, Jan and Janine, thank you very much for offering this space. I love it that you two do. I have a question. Lately, I don't know if this question is proper to do it here, so you will see. Lately, I have heard a lot about a psychedelic. I know Janina is going to be soon talking about that, I think, in a conference, or no?
No, it's not mine. I know so little about psychedelics. I think I'm dangerous.
Okay. It's because my concern is that I have many clients that go to those groups where there are 8, 12 people, and they attend and they take psychedelic and they end up being more dissociated, like they don't integrate. And they have that magic thinking that having a session with that is going to be magic. And like there is some concern. I know it may help some people, but so I don't know if you have any thought about that.
But I share the same concern, but my concern is mostly around the fact that psychedelic treatment is not regulated or organized. So some practitioners give psychedelics with no treatment at all. Some psychedelic use is within a therapeutic program that prepares the individual to take the drugs, works with them during the experience, and then does follow-up work.
Mhm.
So, some people are just given pills to take at home.
Mhm.
Some go in for infusions and have a very intense experience, sometimes with therapy, sometimes with no therapy. It's very scary that
Mhm.
powerful drugs are being used without any kind of treatment standards.
Mhm.
That's what we're missing. Because we all work with treatment standards, right? There are certain things that we will do and certain things we will not do. And that is not the case in the psychedelic world.
Yeah.
It's kind of a free-for-all.
It's new. I think it'll come.
Yes.
I think it will come, but yeah.
It won't come unless there is some kind of standards or regulation.
Well, that's what I mean. I think, yeah.
Because it's too lucrative.
Yeah.
It's a huge, huge
Yeah.
financial market.
Yeah, it is for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
I know I don't think anyone in this group would use psychedelics without a treatment
Mhm.
around it, but there are lots of people doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, business also, yeah. 12 people in one group and only, I mean, no closure, no nothing, yes. Business.
That's
Thank-
scary.
It
Yeah.
is
Scary.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, we've got a few more minutes. Eric? Hello, Eric.
Hello,
Welcome.
thanks. Janina, I jotted down your sentence. We have to ally with them. So when they're ready, we're there. I've been kind of creating une alliance, she calls it, with my therapist. She's big on l'alliance. C'est une 𝗘𝗵𝗂𝗆𝗄𝗧. She's French, but we work in English. And I've sort of thought, yeah, sure, sure, why not? I'm not against des alliances, It's a bit of a motherhood statement. But it turns out, like, I think that I want to come back to noticing. I've noticed that there's something in me that's not interested in noticing at all. In fact, there's something in me that thinks that noticing is exactly where I really don't want to go. I have a background that makes that kind of not hard to understand. And so I can, and somehow being allied with my therapist in a way that I can't really explain. So I can notice stuff. And every time I notice something, I have a fair amount of background in focusing. Every time I notice something, I notice that, okay, so that's not me either. So, because something in me thinks, okay, this is the essential me, so I'm screwed, right? But then I notice it, and then I realize, well, if I'm noticing, it's not me. And the feeling of empowerment of all of a sudden being here, it's like, okay, so it's just, so, because like I want to be like healed. I want a lot of things, I want to be Muhammad Ali. But to realize, well, no, I can't change any of that stuff. What I can do is I can notice, like, I know it's just a word, but it's been very, very helpful for me to just to notice and to notice that I can notice. And then it's a feel that I can't describe, but it's just all of a sudden, bang, I'm present. Like I feel like an adult. So I just would interested in your thoughts on any of this, and my idea that somehow this alliance is like central, even though I don't really understand
Well,
why that should be.
it makes sense because it's social engagement. So, right, so social engagement comes with and requires a feeling of safety, which an alliance, the right alliance, creates that feeling of safety.
Right.
And as a therapist, I use my social engagement system to communicate that it's safe here. I mean, think alliance, we're all wired to ally. That's part of our operating equipment. Trauma interferes with our feeling safe allying, but it doesn't change the fact that we have that capacity built into us. And it's wonderful. So you're using that capacity to, I think of it as co-regulating. In the alliance, your therapist's nervous system regulates your nervous system so that you can notice. And this is exactly what I teach my clients and students in TIST. Notice the part and notice you noticing the part.
Right. Okay. Totally.
And it changes everything.
Yeah.
It's hard to prove.
I'm here to report that that's absolutely my experience as a non-therapist type, but as a client.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And it's a beautiful example of polyvagal theory too, right? In action in terms of co-regulation. When you can settle yourself down, you can begin to find a felt sense in the body. And then you can think more clearly and you can connect. Notice yourself noticing.
It's wonderful.
Beautiful.
Just quickly, there's an image. I used to jog with a guy, and what we could do between the two of us is keep the same pace. It was very difficult for me to keep the same pace by myself, and that was my objective. But when I was running with John, we sort of regulated each other. It's got nothing to do with the topic, but it's just an interesting metaphor.
Yes.
Like, 'cause you bounce off each other in ways that are so subtle, like, and all of a sudden, you've been doing like, I don't know, a 6.5 minute mile time for like an hour or something. Like it's so. Thanks.
That's a beautiful example of polyvagal theory and co-regulation. Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time. That was so wonderful. We really so appreciate you giving us your time, Janina.
It was a
'Cause I know
pleasure.
you're incredibly busy, but so much fun to weave together your model and all these different ways that we have of working with people and helping and serving. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. So we'll see you next time. We have 𝗏𝗚𝗓𝗏𝗔𝗍 and Elspeth Bradley and myself coming to talk about what really fires us up and makes us interested, similarly to what we did with Janina. We've both been at it or all of us have been at it for decades and decades. So we want to be able to share that and also to mentor young people that are coming into the field. I sometimes think, it can be so confusing because there's so many different models now and ways of learning. How do you put them together? So I'm really wanting to help people to be able to do that, to figure out for yourself, how do you want to work? What makes sense for you? So to have Janina and other people come in and we can share these ways and how you can bring polyvagal theory into anything that you're doing. It's just about life. It's about how bodies feel and function in the body, whether you're jogging with a friend or talking to your kids or in a therapy session or in groups. So thank you. Thank you so much, Janina, and everybody for showing up, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jan.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.